Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Big Dreams, Great Teams podcast. I'm Paula Maidens, your CEO and team advisor, hiring strategist, and leadership coach. I'm here to help ambitious business owners just like you transform into confident leaders, building high performing teams and creating sustainable business growth. Today, we're going to talk about how you can actively use your business values to transform your team culture through better communication. And before you think, oh, I don't have, formal company values, please stick with me because this episode is definitely and especially for you. I'm going to show you how to tap into the values that are already in your business, whether they're written down or not, and how to use them to create the kind of culture you actually want in 2025. Okay, let's dive in. So here's the thing about values in your business. They are there whether they are written down or not. If you're running a business, which I know you are, or you wouldn't be listening, you've already got values that are guiding how you operate. They're showing up in the way you treat your customers, the way you handle deadlines, the way you praise your team, like what you talk about and what you don't talk about, what gets you under your skin and makes you really annoyed when something goes wrong, and the standards that you hold for yourself and for others. These are all your values in action, whether they're written down or not. And here's what's really fascinating and something that I see all the time with my clients. These things, these values are shaping your business culture right now, even if you've never formally chosen your top 5 and written them down and decided to call them your company values. It's really, really common in business, particularly small business, to actually have two cultures running. There's the one that you as the business owner, of course, envision, where everybody's proactive and they're taking ownership and they're communicating brilliantly with each other. And then there's the one that your actual behaviors and the way you're communicating as a team is actually creating. So there's actually two cultures that are typically running in most businesses. Now, just last week, I was chatting to a client about exactly this, and I'm sure it's going to sound familiar. This particular client was struggling with team performance, and somebody had given her the advice to talk about her values as a way and as part of addressing the issue with her team, which I completely agree sounds good in theory, right? But here's the thing that I want to share with you today and that I want to hone in on. Unless you use your values really well, they can actually become this extra layer that will dilute your message rather than making it clearer, meaning your conversation will accidentally get harder, not easier. It'll get harder for you to deliver and harder for the person to hear the actual message rather than it just being clear and simple, which is ultimately what you want and need it to be. So let me elaborate on this a little bit further. Let's go with an example. Let's say you're running a professional services business and you've got client delivery timeframes that frankly are crucial and essential to your commitment that you've made to your client. Let's say you've got a team member who's consistently almost missing the deadline. So they're not missing them, but they're submitting the work in a really, really tight time frame close to the deadline, which means that there's no time for proper quality checks, proper reviewing of the work, etc., etc. Now, let's, in this hypothetical scenario that you need to address this because quality, professionalism, core values, and, doing things on time, this is core to your value system, to the way that you want your business to be operating. Regardless of if this is actually written on your wall and written down your fancy values statement, the core values, the core things that are important to you are professionalism, quality, and timeliness. So you've got two ways that you could handle this conversation. The first way, and something that I see all the time, is when we pull out our values or we pull out, one of these words that are important to us and we say, one of our core values is excellence. And I feel like we're not living up to that right now. Or maybe it's one of the things that we've committed to our clients is that we will be excellent. And what we're doing right here or the way you're operating right here isn't excellent. So it's really normal when we're having a difficult conversation to sort of fluff it out, to try and make the person feel better and to throw in some values, sort of speak, hoping it'll soften the message. But what it can actually do is actually dilute the message. And here's another approach that will work, and it will make sure that the message lands in a clearer and more concise way. And that is this. I've noticed the last 3 client projects were submitted right on deadline, which doesn't leave the team much time for proper quality checks. This then impacts our ability to deliver our best work to a client, and it puts pressure on the whole team. I'd love to discuss with you what's causing this tight turnaround on your side and talk about how we can solve this together. So one of our values is a commitment to excellence. So this means that we want to solve problems together. We want to solve them in the open and work on how we can get better. So you can see there that this second approach is being really clear. It's still being empathetic. It's sharing what they've noticed. It's brought in the values, and it's almost offered a collaborative way to solve the problem. Okay, so what I've done there is I've started to give you a bit of an insight into a practical way that you can actually start to use this values-based communication in your day-to-day business. I call it the values actions framework, and it really underpins a lot of the conversations that I have with my clients and how I guide my clients to handle difficult conversations. Now, step 1, when you're dealing with anything difficult and you need to have a conversation with someone on your team, step 1 is always getting specific. You want to stay right away from making general statements about what's happened or about your values or anything like that. And you want to get specific and name exactly what you're seeing, what's actually happened, what needs to change. Now, this isn't confrontation. It's about being crystal clear. So that's step 1, get specific. Step 2, and this is where a lot of us unravel a little bit because of our nerves, because we're trying to be kind, all the things. But step 2 is active listening. And I know that your nature as an entrepreneur, as a problem solver, as a fixer will be to jump into solutions and to try to tell the person how they should change what they're doing, how they need to do what they're doing differently. But actually creating space for your team member to share their perspective, to answer your questions, and for you to actively listen, that is actually crucial to getting the change that you're after. Because sometimes what looks like a performance issue on the surface, sometimes what the conclusion you're jumping to is actually a process problem underneath that needs your listening to actually peel back that layer to get to the heart of what's going on. Step 3 is then making that values connection. But here's the key. Your values support the conversation. Your values don't replace it, and your values aren't like a shield that you hide behind. It's not, we promise the client excellence. It's, hey, I've noticed this. One of our values is excellence. How can we work together to achieve that value? It's like your values are the foundation so that the conversation makes sense, so that the purpose of the conversation makes sense, so that the importance of the conversation makes sense. And then step 4, of course, is defining your next steps. What needs to happen, by when, by who, how you're both going to know it's working, and no sort of vague cheerleader, okay, let's see if we can do better sort of statements. We want specific, actionable steps. So let me run through that again. Step 1 is being specific. What's actually happening? What are you seeing? What needs to change? It's not confrontation, it's clarity. Step 2, active listening, asking questions, not jumping to solutions, getting the team member to tell you what they think's happening, why they think's happening, to try and peel back a few layers. Step 3 is making a values connection, linking the purpose of the change to the values of the business and making sure that they understand why it's important. And step 4, what are we going to do about it? Who's going to do it? Defining the next steps. Now, let's actually think about how this plays out on a day-to-day basis, because what I don't want you to do is to sit there listening to this thinking, oh goodness, this is going to be one of those massive conversations I'm going to have to prepare for, etc., etc. No. We just get to bring this out in our daily operations in a really natural and casual way. Let's say, you've got a marketing business or a service-based business, and let's say that being responsive to client needs is really important. And again, it's probably one of your unwritten values, or maybe it's written down. Let's say you're noticing that client emails are taking longer to be responded to than what you want. Instead of getting frustrated, resenting it, or not saying anything, or even making a general announcement that we need to get more responsive and be better, you could track the response times for a week to understand the pattern. have an individual conversation using this 4-step framework that we just talked about. Create absolutely clear standards across the business for response times. Set up regular check-in conversations to talk about what's making it difficult for us to get back to people within 24 hours. And of course, celebrate when you see improvement. So you can see that this sort of approach, using the values-based communication and leaning into, maybe there's something below the surface here, it solves not just the immediate problem, but it also builds this culture, which I know you all want, of problem solving, of initiative, of proactivity, of teamwork, of collaboration, which I know is what you're aiming for. And here's what I see happening with my clients. And it's really interesting because this sort of communication, this process, when we're linking things to values, when we're letting people understand why what we need to do is important in the scheme of things, etc., what happens? It becomes preventative. Instead of waiting for issues to pop up, you can actually use your values to guide regular team interactions. And in turn, it's like you're teaching and forming the culture, which then brings the initiative and the proactivity to the fore. So one of the ways that you can sort of live your values, I guess, is to bring them into the regularities of what you're doing. Maybe it's a daily meeting, maybe it's a weekly meeting, maybe you kick off a meeting by celebrating a win each week, for example, and maybe that win is something that's linked to your values, written or unwritten. Maybe when you're catching up in your one-on-ones, you're not just talking about tasks, but you talk about how the way tasks and responsibilities are being held link to your values. And when it does come to the time when you need to give clear feedback, and maybe it feels a little bit difficult or uncomfortable, then by using this values-based linking language, it makes those difficult conversations less difficult because people are used to having things framed within the why this is important, why it matters, and how it fits into the bigger picture. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a little bit of an insight into why values are important, whether they're written down or not written down, how your written or unwritten values can potentially be driving your culture, and how you can bring values into your communication to get better performance. So here are the big things I want you to take away from this conversation. Firstly, your values exist, whether they're written down or they're not written down. They show up in how you are running your business. I really encourage you to write them down. And I'm not one of those people who says you can only have 5 values. Have as many as what feels good to you so that people understand the things that are in your head and in your belly and that are important to you, that underpin the way you want them to make decisions and the way you want them to do things. The second thing I want you to walk away today is to know that, yes, talk with, draw on your values, but don't use them as a shield to sugarcoat or dilute your message. Brené Brown says it so beautifully when she says clear is kind. State what's going on, state what needs to change, and then link into the values as to when you're talking about why it's important. Remember that when you're using values in the why part, it actually will help your conversations get clearer, and it'll help the person actually be motivated to change or to do something differently, etc., because they understand how it fits into the bigger picture. And know that this type of communication, this type of regular why-based, values-based communication will help bigger issues from actually developing in the first place, because everybody has that bigger goal, bigger context in mind when they're making their micro day-to-day decisions. Okay, last thing I want to share before we wrap up is to say this. Having difficult conversations with team members will probably never get easy or ever feel completely comfortable. And that is completely okay. What does get easier is actually moving through these conversations via a process. So when you have a structure to follow, you get to practice it, you get to flow through them with more ease. So I'm not sitting here on the other end of the mic saying that, yes, one day these will feel fun or these will be super easy or you'll never stress about them, but they will get easier and they will feel more of what you're part of your day and day when you just run through a process and run through a structure like I've offered you today. And of course, if you're wrestling how to have these clear, values aligned conversations with your team and you want to be clearer, firstly, know you're not alone. And secondly, I'm here to support you if you would like. So that's exactly what I do. I'm all about supporting you to build the high performing team and culture that you desire and frankly deserve. So at any stage, you can book into a dream team discovery call, which is an opportunity to have a conversation about what's going on with your business. And I can share with you how I can support you. But that is it for today. Remember, your values exist whether they're written down or not, and they are so much more than just concepts or words. They shape the way your business is operating, and you can use them as a tool to communicate better, to build the team that will truly take your business where you want it to go. Okay, everybody, thanks for listening in. I will be back in your ears in 2 weeks' time.